how do you combine them all into programs and into connective tissue is what I like to call it, the ways in which you get systems to actually work together. And that's a lot of what we're doing, actually. We're not necessarily always building those smaller use cases like a smart recycling system, or street cleaning services. I mean, these are systems that oftentimes are pretty well established already. How do we make them all work together?
Welcome to the Smart Cities Council Vodcast. Smart Cities Council is an international organization aiming to create a safer, more beautiful, enabled, and resilient future for everyone, with more than 400,000 members and collaborators across the globe. Today, I welcome David Sprinzen from Vantiq to the podcast, a speaker at the Smart Cities Summit North America. David, may I ask you to introduce yourself and your organization?
Yeah, hi, Fanny. My name is David Sprinzen. I'm VP of Partnerships at Vantiq. Vantiq is an AI application development platform. We focus on the subset of applications that are real-time distributed processing, meaning how do you connect to real-time feeds from sensors, from cameras, from existing business systems, understand what's going on across those different feeds, create appropriate analytics patterns and workflows, leverage AI to help you both do the understanding as well as decision making and support the action and the ways in which you're operationalizing AI into when these things happen. This is what we do about it, which we find is often the hardest part people have in true AI implementation. It's once they have the models, how do they turn it into operational systems that are deployed at scale in mission critical environments?
Okay, we will get to AI because that can mean so many different things. First, since we are talking at the Smart Cities Summit and AI can be somewhat connected to smart cities, what does smart city mean to you?
Yeah, I think the term smart city has kind of evolved a bit over the last number of years. I've been working in the smart city space for 5 years and more now, and I've seen even in that short amount of time a switch from what used to be a lot of, I'll call it marketing driven initiatives around look at how our city has cool engagement and trying to create efficiencies here and there. We're trying to make it where the experience of being in our city feels very cutting edge and exotic. And I think those initiatives have been successful. A lot of them ended up becoming more of a gimmick than something that was driving, I think, meaningful change in the city. And so now I think a lot of smart city concepts are moving towards, let's call it the more practical. And practical, I think, is things like how do we improve the flow of traffic in our city? How do we get better at responding to roadway incidents? How do we detect and respond to natural disasters and their impact on our citizens? These are problems that we're historically not very good at solving. I think that the concept of smart city is more now applied to what the opposite of that is, which is a dumb city. And everyone who lives in a city is very familiar with all the things that are dumb about the city, right? In terms of being able to get access to the right kinds of resources, being able to get to your job on time, parking situations. When there is an emergency, how do you actually get the emergency services you need? Those are the things that people are going to say. I don't know what a smart city is, but I know that's dumb.
That's fair. Now, you mentioned specific aspects of a city. And I'm curious because in my experience and understanding, if we talk about smart traffic lights or smart beams, so these individual smart elements, that doesn't necessarily make the city smart. It can be in some aspects smart, but it might be even dumber because why do we have these very small smart elements? Why the whole city doesn't necessarily evolve to this kind of smartness? So in your experience, is it enough to have these elements to be called smart, or there needs to be something else?
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a really good point, which is a collection of a bunch of small use cases that don't actually work together to achieve something greater than the sum of its parts is not ever going to create, I think, what the promise of a smart city is trying to actually achieve, which is everything is interconnected. Things that are happening in one location can impact what's happening in other places, both across geographical regions, across agencies, across different citizen groups. It's often more of an integration challenge in terms of getting some of these smaller use cases, even if they're as a single use case are quite powerful. How do you combine them all into programs and into connective tissue is what I like to call it, the ways in which you get systems to actually work together. And that's a lot of what we're doing, actually. We're not necessarily always building those smaller use cases like a smart recycling system, or street cleaning services. I mean, these are systems that oftentimes are pretty well established already. How do we make them all work together?
So how can AI help creating smart cities?
So I think with AI, there's a number of different things. And AI, of course, is a massive area. And there's everything from predictive modeling in terms of the impact of city planning and construction on how that's going to change traffic flow and ways in which people move through a city. There's more on the predictive modeling side. There's been a lot of that done. Most of that is using more traditional machine learning models. There's AI in the form of, well, the more recent stuff is in generative AI like GPT. And ways in which people are looking at that is you can create chatbot or avatar interfaces into city services, and ways that you're saying, you don't have to always talk to a human. Maybe you need to sometimes, but we can create ways in which we're giving people access to information through AI chatbots that gives them much more high availability and better experiences. Example of that would be we're working on programs around smart tourism, where you can imagine arriving in a new city and you are able to access AI, like a tour guide that knows where you are, knows what's happening in the city, knows what's going on around you. And it can both help you understand what to do and plan your day, but also give you historical information, give you access to city services if you need. So you can kind of imagine that there's this new trend of how do we introduce chat GPT like experiences for people both visiting our city and that live here full time. And then the other area of AI I'd like to call out is agentic AI. And agentic AI, if you're not sure what that means, generally it's saying an AI that has agency, which means AIs that are able to take action. Usually it's with some kind of goal-oriented structure. So for example, creating agents that say optimize the flow of traffic within the city. And that might actually be a number of different agents under the hood, but they're all trying to optimize how do you move cars to make it where you're getting as much throughput as possible. AI is much better at doing that than humans are. There's also agentic AI systems that can do things like automatically structure work orders for city maintenance issues. One of the big areas that we're working on, I hinted at, is natural disasters. A natural disaster scenario, for example, a fire. You might have where you are detecting the fire using more traditional AI, like object recognition, detecting the presence of fire and smoke plumes. That's then feeding into systems that are determining, based on the fire size, location, this is the kind of response that's necessary. This is the different agencies involved. This is the information that we're sharing across those different agencies. Maybe this is the information we're now sharing with citizens. So being able to start structuring okay, we understand what's happening. This is what we're going to do about it. And this is the things that we can automatically do. And this is how we're going to get humans involved in responding to a given incident, even if it's a threat or if it's something like have an event in the city, you have a big sporting event and you're trying to support movement of people to get outside of the area, and you're using agents to try to optimize transportation services and get buses in the right place. There's a lot that you can start thinking about that AI is much better suited to handle what I call the big orchestration problems. And it doesn't mean that humans aren't a part of that, but it means that you can have these orchestration tools that are able to figure out the moving pieces in ways that humans are traditionally quite bad at.
I love that you just described first the active nature of these AI agents, but then also gave us some examples of how they can be proactive, which is also very important, that we are not just reacting, but also preventing, we are proactive in our actions. I love these orchestration pieces that you guys are doing, how these different agents can be integrated into one system and how they can talk to each other. How is the human element involved in that?
There's, I think, a very delicate and important balancing act in terms of building AI systems and smart city initiatives around how to involve humans in decision-making cycles, how to take automatic action, when is the appropriate time that you can do what we would call human on the loop, which is humans watching what the AI is doing, versus human in the loop, which is humans are deciding what to do, often based on AI-enabled input and guidance and recommendations. And on the far end of the spectrum, it's full autonomous systems where oftentimes decisions are happening so fast that humans aren't even able to keep up. I think that this is now it's an art, not a science. And we need to be really careful that we're not trying to automate things that are introducing risk, of course. So taking the example of traffic flow, you could imagine creating a traffic system, a traffic agent that decides that it can reroute traffic through residential neighborhoods and increase throughput dramatically.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, all the people living in those residential neighborhoods are going, what happened to my street? And it might not be that the AI system is trying to harm people's livelihoods. It just wasn't programmed to take that into account. Its goals weren't taking into account all the different relationships involved. And those are things that need to be able to assess as you're starting to roll out these systems, understand where are the points where there's what's called the alignment problem, but where there's misalignment between what the AI wants to do and what actually the impact is. And if you don't take those things into account, then yeah, you will have emergent problems that you may not have even thought would come. So I think that you really need to take an approach of how can we create AI initially just to give us better visibility of what we are doing. And over time, what are the things that we feel comfortable an AI system without introducing lots of risk can start taking action on automatically. Examples of that are, you might say, well, we're going to just automatically trigger dispatch services when we are able to detect some kind of public safety incident. Okay, it's still a human at the end of the day going there, but you're using AI to determine what the incident is and the severity and what kind of different agencies need to be involved. Those are things that you can start looking at automation around. I think it requires a lot of design in front in terms of what the systems can and can't do, and iteration in terms of what is working, how do we assess what is working, what isn't, and over time, how do we evolve the system to start being more and more effective.
Soon this balancing act and assessment is a challenge for creating better futures, better systems for futures. What are the biggest challenges? Is creating smart cities, working with these AI agents?
I think one of the things that everyone immediately goes to is trustworthiness and accountability. How do we create systems that are always going to do exactly what they want them to do, and we can trust that they're always going to do that? And I think what's interesting about the new AI systems that are developed these days with the large language models and agentic AI, they're often non-deterministic. And what I mean by that is they can handle any number of situations, regardless of whether or not they were explicitly trained on a given problem. And that's what makes them really powerful, actually, because you're not having to train them on every possible scenario. It's impossible to train AI systems on every possible scenario. And because these systems are really good at understanding and predicting against data that it's never seen before, that makes them really powerful. However, that also means that they might respond in ways that you don't expect. So a big part of that is trustworthiness frameworks. How do you understand what are the ways in which you're guardrailing AI, making sure there's mechanisms by which you can say, pulling from established policy and protocol around the authority to operate, the kinds of things that it can take action on, the kinds of ways in which it's communicating with humans. And it's pulling that not from its training data, but from sources like documentation and knowledge bases, pulling that in, contextualizing what's going on and saying, this is exactly where I pulled that data from. So it's referenceable. So you get that level of referenceability of where is it getting the information to inform its decision-making. And I also think auditing is a really important part of this. Throughout the meaningful smart city initiative, all of the data analysis that's feeding into decision-making, there needs to be a very robust audit trail of how the decision was made across what data sources. And that's a number of reasons. Obviously, one is accountability. If the system does something that's not expected. It's also for training and making the systems better over time, right? Like the power of AI is generally they're learning systems. You want to create that feedback of how do you make these systems learn and become better. And then there's actually legal implications of always needing to have an audit trail. So I think trustworthiness and transparency through auditing.
You are so very much reflect on this whole summit with other interviews with the podcast, because I ask for challenges and you give me opportunities within those challenges, which is just amazing. And it's really good because it shows that although there are these challenges, we are not just complaining about those challenges, but we find a solution on those challenges. Are there any other opportunities you see for smart cities and agentic AIs?
I think that a big part of the challenges in cities right now is coordination across all of the different existing systems and agencies involved, right? Everything from, of course, law enforcement, fire, public works, transportation services, city maintenance. There's a massive amount of different fragmented systems that have different goals, different humans involved, different pieces of information that they're using. I think that what we would call, multi-agency interoperability, getting all of those different groups to actually have a single integrated understanding of what's happening, what is impacting their domains, what are they doing that's impacting other people's domains. I think that there's a big potential area for innovation of just getting the different groups and systems involved to actually communicate more effectively.
How can we include not just the first, but the second and third rate consequences of these decisions in these multi-agency interoperability? For example, when we talk about electric vehicles, we would say that there would be less emissions. We would have more electric vehicles on the road. But then if there are less emissions, then people would walk more, which means that they would be healthier. Their lungs would be healthier. That's the second rate consequence. The third rate is that the healthcare system would be less burdened with these not obvious diseases, which would come from the air quality. So I'm curious whether we can capture these second and third rate consequences in these interoperable systems, because these are very hard to capture. And I understand that these are very hard to capture.
I don't think that we have implemented enough, not just we in terms of Vantiq, but in terms of society at large, to understand the second and third rate consequences of real AI implementations. I think what you can imagine, though, is especially with things like, let's say, roadway monitoring and management, right? You have people who, when there's a car crash, it causes entire gridlock. And if you're able to decrease the amount of gridlock a city experiences when there's a big car crash by a meaningful percentage, by 25% reduction in response time, by decreasing the flow of traffic to that area, creating ways in which you're better responding to that, then that's going to increase the quality of life of your commuters. It's going to potentially increase the distance by which people are willing to commute. If they go, well, they'll end up getting into the city by the time I need. I don't have to worry about crazy log jams because someone ended up driving across the bridge backwards. Who knows?
Yes.
So I think the experience of trying to get people to live what they're already doing, their normal lives, and having a little bit more trust that there's not going to be abnormal events that shake up their commute or shake up their ability to do what they were planning on doing. I think that can give people a little bit more trust in terms of what the experience of their daily life is.
And even just making these first-rate consequences, these experiences interoperable, that's a huge thing, to be honest. So it's amazing what you are already doing. Now, what advice would you give about these emerging technologies, these emerging practices regarding agentic AI, AI interoperability?
I think that, especially when it comes to trying to tackle a little bit more of a comprehensive system approach to smart cities, it's really important to have lots of different stakeholders at the table from the beginning. Get people to start talking about what are their current points of friction, what are the ways in which they see inefficiencies in the way that data sharing and intelligence is currently being managed, and then get them to come together in terms of how can we make these systems work more effectively, collaboratively across the different data domains and city domains and human domains. I think that there's also a need for us to start iterating on the ways in which we're building and deploying these systems. You're never going to build a utopia digital city where everything is perfectly automated from day one. It's just not going to happen. That's going to take years and a lot of trial and error. And so if you're building things in the software world, you would call it an agile programming methodology, right? You build with goals in mind, build against that, make sure it works, and then start iterating. And over time, you start expanding out. I think that we need to take that approach to city technology and implementation against AI and smart city services, and having this longer term vision of where you want to go across stakeholders, but breaking it into highly digestible and approachable chunks that you can iterate upon. And also that means that you're not necessarily introducing large amounts of risk. You're able to really mitigate what the potential impacts are on some of those second and third rate potential urgent things.
I'm all for this vision-led iterative approach. So please keep up this good work because we need that. David, you have been talking about this and your expertise comes clear and comes out very clearly and answers. Why are you working in this field?
Me personally, I actually have a little bit of a bizarre path to where I got to today. So my background, electrical engineering and physics, and I was doing system modeling, system design. I ended up moving into pursuing neuroscience, and I was doing computational modeling of neurological systems, how the brain works, how the distributed nervous system works, how the eye works in the visual system. And I started getting involved in technology and looking at especially complex system design with the approach of how does the human body, which is a very robust, complex system that is using sensory input and intelligence-based processing and memory and learning, that's something that we can look at other complex systems and say, well, what are some of the lessons learned? And so I got into technology through some of the AI modeling around that. And I actually think that the way we need to look at smart cities is as a digital nervous system. What does that mean? It means that you're looking at the city as a large distributed set of sensory input that can be camera systems and computer vision processing, that can be sensor-based networks. It can also be integration with your citizens, with social media. We're talking about all of those as the sensory inputs into something that is able to understand what's going on. How do we take all those sensors and integrate that into a comprehensive worldview and that situational awareness of what's happening? How do we use that to inform the reflexive parts of the city? When a human touches a hot stove, you don't think about what happens when I touch a hot stove and when was the last time I did that? You immediately pull your hand away. There's ways in which we can apply that flexive processing of when something happens and we know immediately this is something we need to do. How do we start doing that? And then how do we coordinate all of the different moving pieces within a city's operations, like our different organs, to get the desired outcomes and be healthy and integrated system? So I've always come at taking some of the lessons of how our nervous system is structured, and if we can take that as being this exemplar of a very effective distributed learning system, that can apply a lot of that to the way in which we're approaching cities.
Is there a particular project you are very proud of and which shows this kind of understanding of cities?
Yeah, we're working with a group in Asia on the natural disaster response system for one of the largest countries in Asia. They're using our platform on integrating across all of the different potential natural disaster sensory networks. So earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, extreme weather. They are using our platform not only to do that detection, which I think is important, but actually feeding into an orchestration engine that says when there is this natural disaster, when there's a flood in this area, this is how we're organizing all of the different emergency response services, law enforcement, fire, traffic management. This is how we're organizing all of those to respond to this incident at hand. And one of the cool things we're doing there is using generative AI to initiate communication with citizens. So if you've ever been in a natural disaster where you get an alert that says, something's coming, it's a flood, it's in your area, that's not a lot of information for you to know what to do.
No.
So what we've done in that system is say, based on an individual's current GPS location, we can actually use generative AI to spin up an alert that is specific to them, that tells them exactly based on where they are, this is what they need to do. And it can actually open up not just as a one-way alert, but a bi-directional communication. Hey, I'm actually stuck at home with my mother who's in a wheelchair. We're going to need evacuation assistance. Okay, we'll connect you to the right individuals. Or here's an evacuation route depending on the conditions of the flood and where it's projected to go. So I think that as a program is really showcasing where this technology can go. And a lot of it is how do we help people in times of crisis and need? I think that there's like so much that we can do. It's not this traditional sense of, oh, okay, smart city is really just a nice way of saying we're monitoring for people trying to commit crimes and going to catch you in the act, and it's surveillance state. I think that there's ways in which we're able to provide a lot of value without ever touching on people's privacy, because we're not looking for individuals, we're looking for potentially life-saving services that we can provide, and the technology can be better at delivering than humans alone.
What would you like people to take away from the Smart Cities Summit North America?
One thing that's been very apparent here is there's a lot of interest in the vendors, the cities, the thought leaders in the space, all working together on figuring out what can we do here and how do we figure out what works and what doesn't. I think that sense of shared innovation across lots of different groups, I think that's very apparent here. And I love seeing like all the different pieces of the puzzle, so to speak, wanting to come together and work together, everyone from ethics and compliance to the operational leaders to AI visionaries. I think, and then you have networking people and people that are working on making sure these lights stay on. These are all parts of a larger whole that I think people are very receptive to collaborating on what the future of cities look like.
David, thank you so much for your time. I highly appreciate your answers, and please keep up this good work, as I mentioned, because we need this kind of iterative orchestration approach to the future of cities. Do you have any closing comments or requests for the audience?
I think that I'm excited to do this work. I think if you come from a place of mission in terms of we are trying to use technology for good and to solve problems that aren't well solved right now, and this isn't something that is by large companies trying to collect your data or governments trying to monitor its citizens. This is really driven by how can we make people's lives safer and better. So I think it's where we're going to find most adoptions when you're solving real problems for real people.
Thank you so much, David.
Yeah, thank you, Fanny.
If you want to learn more about David Sprinzen, links will be provided in the show notes, and the Smart Cities Council website can inform you even more. What have you learned from this interview? What questions do you have after listening to David? What would you like to know more about? Let us know on the Smart Cities Council website or on LinkedIn. Look out for other episodes and topical discussions, and thanks for tuning in.